I'm Alyssa. I'm one of the curators at the museum, and I'm going to let David Burton, who's the director, get everything off to the start.
All right. Thank you, Alyssa.
Right.
I'm for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Burton. I'm the director of the Grace Hudson Museum, and it's a real pleasure to welcome our audience here tonight and our guests for this virtual program around the exhibition Printed and Stitched, which is that marriage of printmaking and textile art. And we're so fortunate to have the show here at the Grace Hudson Museum. I want to give a shout out to Exhibit Envoy, who organized the show and do so many great shows for museums, well, all along the West Coast now. Before we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the original caretakers of the land. The Grace Hudson Museum is located in South Mendocino County, and along with our neighbor counties, Lake County and Sonoma County, really comprise the traditional homelands of the Pomo people, who are the original folks in this area. And at the Grace Hudson Museum, we strive to honor this land by bringing truth and nuance to the stories we tell about all people. And wherever you live, we want to encourage you to get to know more about the history and experience of the Native peoples in your area. All right, without further ado, I'd like to, our artists today are Christine Aaron, Jami Tabak, and Mel Beach. And I'm going to throw it to Christine for the first presentation. So Christine, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. About a couple of years ago, perhaps, Kevin and Barbara reached out to me to ask me if I was interested in juring their exhibit. And I looked at both of the websites from the Contemporary Society of Printmakers and SACWA, and was really impressed with the level of the work. And so I was actually very excited to be invited to do this. I thought that what I might do is just quickly show a little bit of my own work, especially where it crosses over between the fiber and printmaking. I started work as a printmaker, and very quickly, of course, now I'm trying to make this go. There we go. And so I'm a very material-based artist, and so I use a lot of paper and wood, stitching, found objects, ephemeral nests, birds' eggshells, and stuff like that. But my original main love was printmaking, and so I printed on metal and then oxidized the metal as part of the piece, printed on large Gompi panels. Those are very thin, almost tissue paper-like panels on the right that I hand printed. So I won't go into detail, but this is something called the Memory Project, which traveled to Thousand Oaks, California, and is composed of community members submitting memories, and then they're all on a website, and they're all basically archived so that anyone could go and read about them. So this was me printing one of those sheets that we had to hand ink up and pull. And this is another installation I did. These are all hand-dyed silk cahoons that are stitched together in different configurations by hand, and then installed in different spaces in different ways. I prefer them to be wrapping around walls and going onto the floor if I have the space. These are drilled and burned and printed slices of tree. printing again on fine Gampi and waxing some of them. Other ones I drilled and burned. This is a paper piece. Started becoming very interested in paper a few years ago, and first started purchasing paper and burning it and then stitching. This is a cyanotype that I created and dyed and stitched together. This is an encaustic monotype. You'll be learning about monotypes if you go to the museum workshop, which I would encourage you to do, because monotype is a very forgiving and enjoyable and fun way to enter into printmaking. It's the way I entered into printmaking. And this is one that's created with wax instead of oil-based inks and then stitched. This is a regular ink-based monotype with stitching on it. This is one of the pieces that I made handmade paper, abaca and cotton with embedded birds' nests and eggshells. And then these is a series called Marking Time that I started during COVID. And they're composed of tea bags, all the tea bags that I used to dye the silk cocoons. I then decided to use the small canvases, including a lot of the stuff that I have found when walking or saved from memories that I've had and family that I've lost. And this is the piece that happens to be in the printed and stitched exhibit. So I experiment a lot with materials, and this has an encaustic monotype and then hand stitching. But I could show you other ways in which that combination of fiber and paper and stitching and printmaking come together to really allow me to say what I want to say with my work. So this was my first step in terms of the jurying. I got the lists of work and, basically went through it 2 or 3 times first, making a lot of notes in terms of either questions I had about the medium or wanting to just get a feel for what the work was and what kind of work it was. And then I printed out like a relative to each other scale of the work, because one of the things that's difficult is when you're doing something online, they're all the same size. And I wanted to get an idea of what the scale of each piece was in relationship to the other work, and also picture how it would be able to be displayed within the space. I knew that I would be able to have some sculptural pieces, which I really wanted to have, not just 2-dimensional work. And so there was also a lot of playing with size and method. And I think what I really enjoyed most was when there was a material confusion. So this is Barbara Kibbe's piece, and there is no stitching, but if you didn't know it, you would think that these are pulled apart fabrics or stitching. It's presented on 9 panels to reference the quilt and quilting and stitching within the pieces, but there's no actual stitching or fiber as part of the work itself. And then this is a piece that reads like a print in a lot of ways, and yet it's and it is partly a print, but it's done on material and canvas over a frame and stitched. And this is a printmaker using fiber and materials and stitching instead of using paper. And I thought that was very beautiful. Then there was the much more serene, densely stitched, dyed piece by Ann Johnston, and this very minimal piece by Karen Gallagher Iverson, which again was intriguing because so much detail was in it, but in fact, it ended up being a very calm and serene piece. Whoops. And then, as opposed to this piece by Viviana Lombroso, that could read as if it was a book or a manuscript, printing, stitching, attaching, very densely worked. And I think as a juror, the most important thing for me is to look at a range of the work that was presented and see how they had conversations with one another. And I think I said in my juror statement that I could have chosen a number of different shows from the work. The work was all of very high quality, but at some point you start to see conversations begin to happen. And in honoring that, I then start to choose work that's going to enhance that conversation. So I wanted a mixture of work that showed the variety of printmaking techniques and fiber and stitching and quilting techniques. So within the language of quilting, this is very much in the language of quilting, but using gelatin plate and silkscreen, printing, fabric paint, dye, thread, machine and hand stitching. I looked for pieces that were had some humor. Rage keeps her busy. I laugh every time I see this piece because I can really relate to those feelings. And it was serious, but it was humorous at the same time. This piece looked like it had stitching, yet it's a reduction woodcut print, pochoir, but there is no actual stitching in it. So I did choose work that reference the language of printmaking or reference the language of quilt making, fiber and stitch, without necessarily using all of those materials. This is another one of the pieces that was very intricate and used, for instance, linocut and letterpress, metal letterpress, collograph. So I'm choosing work both that's in conversation with other work, but also that really show the range of what these mediums can do, because I think artists are the most amazing problem solvers. And so I think given this challenge for each organization was to think about their work in a slightly different way and through a different lens in terms of the processes and the materials that were used. And I think the results are really interesting and beautiful and intriguing and really stretch the ways in which we use those terms. I think once upon a time, the categories were acrylic or fiber or craft or fine art. And I think increasingly, in a really wonderful way, all of those boundaries are getting blurry, and artists are choosing the best materials and methods and processes that will hold their own voice and convey what they want to convey. And as a result of that flexibility, I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting work and viewpoints. This includes cyanotypes, which is not technically a printmaking. It's a photographic print process, but is a print just the same. So I mean, I just chose some of the work that's in the show, but I wanted to really show that range of the way in which each artist interpreted both the prospectus in terms of the materials and how they incorporated it, new things in their own work, but still in their own voice. And I think the ways in which all of the artists did that basically represents the many ways that people, artists were looking at these things and creating very diverse work. So I looked for a balance of things that were representational, not so representational. I looked for pieces that were more sculptural. This piece, it's hard to tell from here, but it floats away from the wall and has translucent layers. This is a book that's not a book, but that's standing and is more sculptural. And this piece is stitched together 570 inches long with prints and stitching on all of the squares, and can be hung over a quilt bar, can sit on a pedestal flowing onto the floor, can go from the wall to the floor. And I think the last thing I would say is what I'm also really enjoying is watching the iterations and how it's hung in each space. So the space, the original space, the way in which it was hung and how it was hung is very different than in the Grace Museum. And I think what's wonderful about that is you start to see other conversations that I wasn't even looking at start to form and really basically increase the reach and the way of looking at this work in even different ways than I anticipated when I chose the work that I chose. That's it.
Christine, could you remind us how many pieces were submitted and how many pieces did you ultimately, was there a goal of a certain number of pieces you had to select from everything that was submitted?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think I also should say that I chose one of the artists that I included. I chose one piece per artist. There were times that I made having laid everything out, which I did on this large table. I occasionally subbed out pieces because the other piece by the artists was in better conversation with the pieces I had chosen. I think there was about 50% or more artists that submitted that were included, might be quite a bit higher than that, with several pieces, 2 to 3 being submitted per artist. And I tried, and interestingly enough, I wanted both organizations represented, and I was really pleased to see that when I tallied the numbers represented by each organization, that it was roughly equal at the get-go. And so there was very little that I changed as a result of that.
Had you juried exhibitions before, Christine?
I had not. In our first conversation, I remember saying, well, I mean, I'm a member of a number of cooperative and other professional art organizations. So I've been part of groups during People for Membership, or part of a group during for awards. Have hung many exhibits, but I hadn't juried. Originally, it was going to be myself and 2 other people. And then a week or two into us speaking, I got an email that basically said, why don't you just do it? And I said, well, I know juried exhibits are very important to organizations in terms of attracting eyes to the organization and fundraising, and that I really didn't think I had a name that was going to help that effort. But they left it as is, and it was a really, I've watched other people jury shows, and I'll share this one other quick thing. Basically, I watched this artist whom I really admire jury a show, and he said, there's a portion of the work that was going to be in whatever show I curated, and there was a portion of the work that wasn't going to be. And for instance, I'll say, please don't photograph your stuff on a shag carpet or with a frame or with glare coming off whatever it is, or with no reference to its scale or how it would be in the environment. But he said, but after I pick the initial work, it's then that I look at it and I start to see what is this exhibit going to be, and what is it going to speak to. And so, as I had said in my statement, there was work that didn't get included, not because it wasn't beautiful or good work, but that with the group that I already had, I wanted to make sure to fill out that conversation. So I wanted to make sure, in addition to the work itself being high quality, that it spoke to all of the different ways in which you can use these materials and methods and processes to create a variety of work.
Well, you did a fantastic job. So,
Thank you.
yeah. And would you do it again?
Beautiful work.
Would you want to jury again?
Yeah, I would. I think the hardest part for me was not, I know what it's like, still do, and what it's like getting the, non-acceptance or rejections and stuff in the mail. And it always feels personal, and it's not personal, and it's not even sometimes about the work itself. And I think that I saw that even more so when I was the one who was doing the jurying and understood it much more clearly in that way. So yeah, I think, I would love to do that again.
All right, good. Well, I hope you get a chance.
Okay.
Why don't we move on to Mel? Mel, you want to, or are we moving on to Jami? Jami, you want to go next?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jami Tabak. I do want to thank the Grace Hudson Museum and the wonderful curator, Alyssa Bogue, and to Christina Ahrens. Thank you so much, our esteemed juror. And thank you for showing us how you chose our work and for sharing your work with us also. Very intriguing. The exhibition is stunning and installed beautifully, and if you can get there, it would be great to see it in person. So I'm going to share the screen here to here and tell you that my journey begins as a printmaker, and I've been a printmaker for 50 years, exploring and teaching workshops in many print processes. And my work generally deals with a global issue and a struggle, but for the past 20 years centers around climate change. At some point, I began to add collage to my prints, and to help them to integrate with the image, I drew little stitch-like lines around them as I will move along. But as you can see in this etching, which embeds a little poem in it, it's called We Were Here. And it's got little lines and sketchy little lines. And at some point, another artist at an exhibit was looking very closely at it, and he asked me if I sewed those lines. And I said, no, I didn't. But he said, you should. It might be good for you to sew into your prints. By chance, soon after this encounter, I became interested in binding books when I moved out to California here 11 years ago. And until then, most of my work was really seen only under glass and very protected and very precious. And I worried about it being handled and touched mostly because it was on such fine rag paper. So when I began to think about binding this particular accordion book here that's an exhibit, I used that print as the catalyst for this book, by the way, and began to add these little collaged pieces to it. And you know, printmaking requires drawing and painting, and it's a really involved discipline in itself. So I started to cut up the prints and burn them and put in the elements of the climate that were creating a problem. And then I took some waxed thread and sewed them together in a very fragile and very delicate way that kind of really gave a feeling of fragility in life and how hard it is. And here you can see all of these extra little lines that are connecting the collaged pieces that are orange. And you can easily see my predilection to the idea of quilting and piecing together and disrupting the original way of the square paper that was rigid. And here I've distressed it. And this is the back of each of these accordion books are also embellished and filled with print matter in them. So the first image I showed you is a 16 by 20 inch polymer plate print. And the poem that's in the print is called Smiling in Your Dreams. Saw you dreaming about me, full-faced smile, remembering us the way we used to be. Cloud projections, softly stated, we were here. It's written and etched along through constantly. And then along the way, as I had met these book artists and was working at a letterpress shop and learning all these different book bindings, the shop acquired a very old but in excellent condition, a perforating machine. And I guess it was used, it was like from the late 1800s, and I guess it was used to make tickets or tear off pads and, you know, whatever you would see that kind of use for that. And I started to go over my prints, and this particular print and the next one are about the separation of family on the border of the US and Mexico. And through letterpress used a lot of words, and I call them my dis project. And it actually looks like a little sewing machine might have scooted along the paper. And let me just make this a little bigger. A little more of the words of disbandment and dispersion. And the perforation machine I discovered right before the pandemic, and then I was missing it and told my art buddies that I was going through perforation anxiety. Here, I began to do some small drawings, and I'm mostly a conceptual artist, as you could see here. And the background is painted with some watercolors, and there's some printmaking back there, and then drawing along there, and the continued idea of these really intriguing stitching marks that looked like thread but weren't. There's a few of them here, and there's some pen mark, and mark making for printmakers is a really important aspect, a really important element of all of this. And we use lots of different plates, anything from a collograph plate, which could be textured cardboard, polymer plates. We use linoleum block prints, and all sorts of ways to create and put an impression and a mark into something and push some ink into it and coax the ink out with some nice, beautiful dampened paper. We dampen the paper because when the paper is made in the factories and in the mill, in the pulp is injected a lot of sizing to protect the paper while it's being transported, and while we keep it in our studio with a for shelf life. And the paper needs, when you soak it, you're leaching out that sizing in it and softening the paper up, and then it's in a very delicate and fragile place when you begin to approach it to put your ink in, to get ink into it. And that's always a really nice textural process to go through. Here I've got some work that's newer, and it's threaded. Some prints have been broken up, and I call them suspension. The work I showed you on the yellow paper, I call Sun on My Face. But here we have two works I call suspension, and they can be suspended up in the air, from threading, and suspend in the air and not be under glass and have a more 3D effect. And they're etchings, and also some linoleum block print in there and some hand coloring. These prints were made, this was a dry point etching. I had some old zinc plates and scratched vigorously into them. Everything I do is non-toxic and takes care of myself as the artist, my students, and the environment. So I do not use acid or any mordants, and it's been decades since I've used anything like that. And in the 1980s, the plates came out that we really could expose with sun and water, and we were concerned about our health. And I was so happy when the ink companies also responded and created inks that are water soluble. And I'm really happy about that, and I've been fostering and been an advocate of non-toxic, chemical-free printmaking process for since the 1980s. And so that's always an important aspect because I'm dealing with the climate, and I really do want to make sure that we take care of ourselves. And finally, here is a piece of handmade paper, and it's part of a collaboration with the paper maker and fiber artist, Jane Ingram Allen, and myself, who have had a large exhibit traveling around the country. It's in Taiwan right now, but it's made up of strips of a dozen prints and paper like this. And there's 38 at this point on exhibit, but I'm not going to go into that. But it was the supreme connection I felt to show you this, because here I was a printmaker working with a fiber artist, and it truly is an extension of what we're looking at in the exhibit here tonight. And the combination of two people and ideas, and also coming out of our comfort zone and learning other process along the way. So that's my talk, my gig. Thanks for coming and thanks for listening and appreciating the work I do.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here, Jami. What what initially drew you to art? Did you start making art at a young age?
I did. I was born into a very artsy family, and I always tell people that soon after I was born, I was enrolled in art school. So I grew up around New York City and went to the Victor D'Amico School. He was a great educator of children. And that was my start into the world. But I learned about printmaking towards around 20 years old, and I became smitten with it immediately. I couldn't stay away from it, and it's really been the most stronghold I'm printing for all this time.
Are there other disciplines that you're attracted to as much or maybe a little less than printmaking?
Yes, and from the project, with paper making, I've added paper making and want to continue to print on my own handmade paper for a while now and molding, and that's going to take me into a whole new expression. And my work has definitely become sculptural. It's no longer very 2D. It's sculptural, and I see it in a whole different way, and its ability to have shadows that become part of the work and the lighting around it. And it's really been an interesting journey as an artist. And I always tell people it's great to be an artist. And as a young person, I really always thought that, I saw work on the walls in the museums, and that's all I really could see. But along the way and along my lifetime, I have met the most wonderful people and taught and had worn many hats. For the first years, I started and developed an art history lecturing service in New York City that I conducted for 32 years. So I saw lots of artwork all the time changing and saw people's response to art and how they looked at art. And all of this makes me the artist that I am, where I think I have a lot to think. We have a lot to think about when we're creating art, and getting it all untangled and then tangling it back up and putting it out there for people to see. It's been my biggest joy, really, and coming and living out in California for the last 10 years or so, and meeting everyone out here. And my greatest honor was to be president of the California Society of Printmakers and meet these great printers out here. And it's, like I said, it's been my greatest joy, and it's really a joy to be an artist.
No regrets, it doesn't sound like.
Yeah, no.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Jami.
Thank
Let's
you.
move on to Mel.
Hello, hello. I'm delighted to be here. My piece that was juried into the show is Keep on the Sunny Side. There's my website, melbeachquilts.com. I represent the quilting kind of side of things. So a little bit about me. I'm here based in San Jose, California. I'm an artist, teacher, and writer. I am the current president of Studio Art Quilt Associates. We often refer to it as SAQA. Put my president's hat on. SAQA is, we have about 4,300 members living all around the world, which is really exciting. We're all passionate about the art quilt, and that includes not just art quilters, artists, but we also have a growing group of collectors. We have museum and curators, we have gallerists, folks that are all just really excited and passionate about art quilts as fine art. And that's our mission, is to promote the art quilt. Our definition of an art quilt is pretty broad. It's basically any creative visual work that is layered and stitched, or references that form of stitched layered structure. We have some juried artist members who have made art out of wood. We have a number of 3D fiber artists. So it's a really exciting time to be part of SAQA and the art quilt movement. When I'm not doing SAQA elements, I am very involved with project quilting. This is an annual series that I do. There are 6 one-week quilt challenges, and it's hosted by Kim Lepasic, who is a quilter, and she goes by Persimmon Dreams. And basically, she's a big fan of Project Runway, the fashion show that you may have seen reality TV. And similar to that time crunch, basically in Project Quilting, participants have 1 week to start and finish a quilt that's inspired by a weekly challenge theme. And so it's fast, it's furious. There's not a whole lot of time to procrastinate. And for them, their definition of what an entry has to be is either a combination of patchwork or applique. Has to have 3 layers stitched together either by hand or by machine. So it's pretty broad, which is really fun. And I will say that season 15 is underway. They've been doing this for 15 years, and it's going to be going through March 24th. So if you're interested, you're a quilter of any kind, and you can fit those entry requirements, I invite you to join the fun. So I've been participating in Project Quilting since season 7, which was 2016. And as a result, I've finished 49 one-week quilt challenges doing that. And I really love them. I find that the weekly prompts have really pushed me to explore all new design sources. I've really pushed me to play with different materials. If you ever watch Project Runway, my favorite episode of each season is the Unconventional Materials Challenge, where they take the fashion designers to like a dollar store or a hardware store, and they have to get all of their materials to make some kind of fashion couture outfit. And so one season, I challenged myself to use all unconventional materials in my art quilts, and that included computer parts, playing cards, office supplies, recycled goods, etc. And so it's really kind of pushed me into grow as an artist and certainly as a quilter. And so my piece that I made, Keep on the Sunny Side, came out of one of those quilt challenges, those one-week challenges. And that was for season 12. It was the first challenge of the year. And it was called Illuminating and Ultimate Gray. And if you recognize those 2 colors, those were the 2021 Pantone colors of the year. And so according to Pantone, the illuminating yellow represented hopefulness. This was kind of coming hopefully out of the pandemic. And then Ultimate Gray represented strength. And so a quote from their website was, "It was a message of happiness supported by fortitude." And this was this challenge was through January 3rd through the 10th, 2021. And just kind of make a little note of those dates because there were some pretty significant things that happened that inspired my particular piece. I certainly have a pretty extensive collection of commercial quilting fabrics, and these would have all fit the bill for that particular color theme. But instead, I decided back then, I just recently taken my first gel plate printing class, and so I thought it'd be fun to create my own prints. And so to kind of put what I just learned to work. And so gel plate printing, I started with a bunch of squares. There were about 6 or 7 inches of solid color fabrics that I had already in my stash. That's what we call our collection of fabrics. And I did a variety of gel plate printing using all kinds of different texture tools. And that included the vinyl placemats or bath mats that you see on the screen. I used stencils, rubber combs, bubble wrap, pretty much anything I already had in my hands that could add some fun pattern and texture. And I was doing this mostly with Golden Open acrylic paints. They worked really well. They stayed moist for a little bit longer for the process. And this was kind of my initial sketch. When I thought about hope and optimism, I thought of a sun. And for strength and fortitude, my symbol I kept thinking of was rocks. And so this was just a rough sketch using some of those fabrics. And so from a rough sketch, I kind of worked on some background, adding some sun rays, more sun rays using those prints, my rocks. And here I am trying to figure out that central focus point, some kind of sun element. And you can see I'm kind of honing in closer and closer to the finished design. And so that's kind of just the basic layout. For the stitching component, I do a combination of stitching on both a domestic machine, but for this particular project, I opted to do it on a long arm machine that I had. So if you can see some of those great stitching details and patterns and textures. And if you're not familiar with a long arm machine, this is what it looks like. It's a giant frame, about 10 feet. It takes up a significant portion of my studio. And the head of the machine, actually, you can move that around and you can create all kinds of stitched patterns onto it. So it's kind of fun. You see a little tablet there, but it is truly me driving the head and creating those different patterns and shapes of stitches. And so after I did all my stitching and I faced it, this was the finished piece. I call it Keep on the Sunny Side. This was based on the title on a favorite quilt, a favorite song that we used to sing at Girl Scout camp called Keep on the Sunny Side. And it had all these corny knock-knock jokes in between. I will not bore you with those. But as I reflected back, a big part of my inspiration is this particular week was coincided with the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. And so as I kind of was processing what had happened at the Capitol, watching all the news footage, in many ways, this piece was very much shaped by those events. And I really saw the connection between those rocks as really the strength of our Capitol Police and everybody that was inside during the attacks. And then just those sunlight, that beams of light really represented the hope, the resilience for our democracy. And so while it's a kind of a corny, title, it really had a lot of thought behind it, intention, and hopefully channeling some hope and strength out into our world. I was delighted. The Printed and Stitch exhibition opened here in San Jose. So I had not only had a chance to do some gallery sitting to keep the museum open, but I also had a chance to attend the opening reception. And during that opening reception, a number of artists from both organizations were present and talking about, we did a little artist walk from throughout the pieces. And I was fascinated just hearing the range of techniques, the range of sources of inspiration that went into each and every single piece that was there. I was just fascinated, very inspired to hear firsthand from the artists that were able to attend from both parties. And so I went home and was really kind of percolating over all the gems that I had taken away from that particular artist walk. And I kind of thought about some of my other favorite block printing techniques I've been doing in printmaking and how could I kind of incorporate more of it. I especially loved hearing the challenges that both parties work with. The printmakers were really challenged with the stitching and the quilters were often challenged with the printing techniques. And so I have been doing block printing for a number of years and I've done a 100-day project, as you can see here, where I carved 145 stamps. And I've done 2 Carved December, where every day you get a prompt, and I carved again another 60 plus stamps in the month of December. And so I, wanted to kind of revisit and see, okay, how else can I push block printing with some of my fiber art? And it was that month after the reception that I went back to my studio, pulled out a bunch of these block prints, and I started a new series I call Block Printed and Stitch series. I'm working with mostly Evelon. If you're not familiar with Evelon, it is a non-woven fiber. My understanding is bookmakers often use it. It's paper thin, but it's super strong and soft, supple like fabric. And so it takes paint beautifully. So those are acrylic paints I'm doing. I call it faux dyeing. But it also takes ink beautifully. And so I painted it and then transferred my own block prints to create this kind of quilterly grid design. And then once that was layered down with some batting, I did a pretty extensive combination of both machine stitching and hand embroidery. And this was the first piece that I made. I actually made this for Studio Art Quilt Associates benefit auction. This is an annual auction we do each September timeframe. And so I'm delighted this piece went to an amazing home here in the Bay Area. So it'll be near and dear for sure. And this was really exciting. This is about 12 by 12 inches, so fairly compact. And I just kept percolating, okay, how else can I involve block printing and stitching? And so 2 more grid-like designs came about soon thereafter. You'll notice that I kind of did less and less machine stitching and more hand embroidery with a variety of threads like pearl cotton, and really kind of they showcase beautifully. I found these stitching sessions to be extremely meditative, just like the block printing and carving. I was using my hands, using my heart, using my mind, and really kind of being very thoughtful, very intentional with each stitch that I was taking. And it was just a matter of time until I started, I love mandalas. And so after those three, I started block printing in a mandala layout, still on Evelyn, just a different radial symmetry. This is a time-lapse video of me kind of auditioning. I don't plan. I just start in the center and add one ring at a time and just kind of keep grabbing different block prints and seeing, okay, how would this look in this space? And just doing my best to repeat in that radial symmetry. This is super sped up, so it doesn't take me that long. I would do maybe 2 or 3 each evening. Again, a very meditative process. And those mandalas end up resulting in another smaller series of block printed and stitched mandala designs. Again, these are anywhere from 12.5 to 13 inches. And I mean, it's just fun, meditative. I was posting almost every day, doing my stitching sessions and kind of seeing that transformation from plain white material to the dyeing, to the stitching and block printing. So these are kind of traveling right now. I'm continuing. My brain's been percolating as to where else I can take this particular series and go with it in some of my block printing. I have some ideas that I'm hoping to explore this upcoming season. And I want to say a big thank you to the Grace Hudson Museum for hosting Printed and Stitch and taking such great care of our artwork while it's in your stead. Many thanks to our incredible juror, Christine Aaron, and thanks to both partner organizations. This is what SACO's really been pursuing, is doing these partnerships with other art organizations, and the California Society of Printmakers have been fantastic. It's been a beautiful partnership and really nice crossover of both art forms. And so we're really honored to be partnering with them and learning more about their art forms and vice versa. It's been a really exciting partnership for sure. So that's it for me.
All right, Mel. I'm going to ask you a similar question I asked to Jami. When did you start creating art? And were you crafting at a young age, or what
I would say I was
led you?
very crafty ever since a kid. We didn't have cable TV growing up, so I got very involved with Scouts and 4-H, and so I've been doing crafts all in art. I love taking art classes in high school, but I didn't get formally trained in college or beyond. It was my last year of grad school, and I had a stack of T-shirts that I was no longer wearing, and somewhere I got the idea that you could turn them into a quilt. And so I've been quilting for about 21 years, very traditional quilting for the first probably 10 or 15 years, but moving cross country to California, really, this is like a mecca of art quilting, and a lot of founding artists that have been here in the Bay Area, especially. And so joining guilds, joining different organizations and local museums, I've really seen that kind of crossover from traditional into art quilts. And I can say SACO has been a big part of that journey as well.
What I'm curious too, when you think about making art, are there influences? I know obviously your love of material, but are there other artistic influences in your life?
I would say everywhere, certainly during the pandemic, when museums, quilt shows, galleries, those were often a big source of inspiration for me and my art. And so when those were closed for a good year and a half plus with California, especially, I had to really look for other sources of inspiration. So I've done a number of 100-day projects, and one of them was looking for daily sources of inspiration in my limited bubble. And so whether it was on a walk, whether it was a photo I'd taken, so truly, if I arrive to a destination 5-10 minutes early, I do a walkabout, and I usually have my camera out taking pictures for interesting compositions, patterns, shapes, etc. I'm constantly having my artist eye fine-tuned to my surroundings.
Mm. And one more thing, and I would like to certainly open it up to the audience if they have questions. Yeah, and welcome back our other guests as well to the screen. You noted at the very first slide, you also address yourself as a writer. So I'm wondering if she could share with us what kind of writing you do.
I write for art quilt magazines, actually. So I often, as a teacher, I do a number of articles for Quilting Arts magazine is a big one, mostly US based. I've written for some modern quilt magazines. I'm a member of um, for art for businesses, Creative Craft Industry Alliance. So I've written articles for them in terms of how I've kind of taken my art and turned into a business and some different professional development opportunities. So I really love sharing my journey with a broader audience. I do a blog post. I maintain a blog, and so I love kind of documenting my journey, my adventures in quilting, and sharing kind of the sources of inspiration, my processes, my learning moments, because I think each piece we always learn from as well.
Very integrated with your life in the arts. That's wonderful. Alyssa, you want to join us back on screen? Are there any questions you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to make?
I'm really curious if anyone in our audience has any questions. I know that there are a number of textile artists and artists themselves in there. Bueller?
Oh, you're going to start calling them out now.
No, I won't. I won't do that. You have to give me a second.
Panelists, are there any questions you'd like to ask each other?
Well, I guess, Christine, you've had a chance to see it, from paper and files, and seeing it, either video or haven't seen it in person. How'd you, how different is it from going from that digital files to seeing it actually on walls?
It was very different, and I'm still planning, I'm keeping track of where it travels to, because I really want to see it in person. But just seeing it in the video that Grace Museum sent me, first of all, it's a beautiful space, and they hung it beautifully. So I was very curious as to what they hung next to what, and what kind of conversations were fostered as a result of that. But also seeing the scale, even, my little paper things just didn't do justice to what those pieces, the presence the pieces had in a space. And it was really gratifying to see that.
I'll kind of echo that sentiment it's not quite the same, but every time we get like a list of images and of the pieces, and then you see what they're actually like. And so Kevin Harris's piece, for example, was a lot more delicate and kind of ethereal than I thought it would be. So there are always sometimes the colors are a little bit different. And then Christine, you were talking about the conversations between pieces. And so when you notice those, sometimes, you decide, oh, maybe this would look better next to this piece because it actually is different than what I thought it would be like. So
yeah, and you can't see that until it's having hung shows before, exactly as you said. And each space, I think, also lends itself to different groupings. So that's what's so much fun for me to see, is how in each iteration it changes.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple of comments here. Oh, one question and a comment. Betty asks, Mel, this is directed towards you. Can you spell the paper you were using in your work? How are you embroidering on them? Are you using batting?
Great question. The material I'm using is Evolon, EVOLON. I get it from Talas, TALAS.com. It's mostly focused on book preservation and book binding. So I can't quite put in the chat. I don't see a way. It's not, it's just only going to host and panelists. But it's really it comes on either sheets of paper or, sheets, or you can get on a bolt, which is about 40 inches. And I don't know how many feet it is. It is a non-woven. And so it paints beautifully, it block prints beautifully, and it stitches beautifully. The only thing you have to be mindful is once you punch a hole into it, it is fairly permanent. Whereas with fabric and wovens, you can kind of push things around if you have to take out a stitch or didn't mean to put your needle somewhere. So you just have to be a little bit more mindful. But, luckily, that's why I think I've kind of shifted over to more and more hand stitching. It's going to be really thoughtful about where I'm putting the needle, take my time, enjoy the meditative nature. I am layering it with batting, so I do most of the some of the machine stitching with just the Evelon and then the batting. And I do most of my hand embroidery that way. This way, I then put on a fake back, a false back, to conceal some of the back sides of the stitches, because that's not as pretty as the front side. So there is batting in there. I also put some pretty heavy duty stabilizer, especially for some of those scalloped edges. This way they don't flop down. They really stay nice and firm when they're on the walls.
All right. Here's a message from April Sproul, who was here at the museum. It was back in November, I think. Was that right, Alyssa, or more recently? Anyway,
Recently, but it was lovely and wonderful, and all the participants were very artistic and ready to explore.
well, April wanted to share, just wanted you to know how much I enjoyed the exhibit. It was a great cross-section of art. So thank you, April, for that. Here's Catherine, who's asking or commenting, thank you to Christine and the organizers for putting together a very vivid and cohesive show. I look forward to the February SACWA meeting.
And Laura Fogg had a question, if you don't mind me asking, David.
Go ahead.
If you've ever been disappointed in how a show has been hung. I think that was mostly geared for Christine. Or, you have this idea and then.
I think it's really interesting. I'll speak for myself. I tend to get locked into how I'm seeing something. So for this memory project, when I got invited to be in Thousand Oaks, I had all these very specific, you hang this here and this is what you do, and the curator was very kind and then hung it the way she wanted to hang it. And the first reaction is, wait a second. But what's so interesting is it ended up having things that I actually ended up preferring to how I had done it the first time. And I think that's what happens, and what is so fabulous about an exhibit that travels, because each group that hangs it sees different relationships. And so I've learned much better to start respecting that and looking at it through somebody else's eyes, in terms of what relationships they're piecing together, and whether it's material or process or color or scale or, and that's why I don't think the people who hang the exhibits get enough credit, because if you've ever been to an exhibit that was not very well hung, it destroys a lot of the cohesion or the appreciation for the individual pieces of art. So I want to give a shout out to people who have to hang these exhibits, when they weren't even the ones to choose the work and make sense of and create a narrative through the way in which they hang the work.
Oftentimes the space they're hanging them in dictates solutions as well. The configuration of the room, the color of the walls, and all of that as well.
Mm.
I will take that comment that was asked as a high compliment to Alyssa, who does a fantastic job with all our exhibits.
Yes.
Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Denver, who is our preparator, he has much more of an artistic eye than I do. So we both look at things differently, and I think gotten good at, taking the best from both worlds.
Okay. I'm going to put out a last call for questions and comments, as we're already at 7:10. And I don't want to impose too much longer on our guest time. So give me up something else here, I think.
Just another comment from Betty Lacey. It's a great show. Thank you, everyone. So I'm glad to have so many attendees who came in today. And glad, of course, for our panelists to be here and to share more about the exhibit. So hopefully in a couple weeks, I make no promises, we'll also have this up on YouTube.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great fun to be able to listen to, the artist's creation process, the museum's ability to have an exhibit of this scale, and give people the opportunity to really ask questions and explore the way in which each person approached this. Each was very different. So I thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate anybody who joined in today.
And
Yes.
I kind of wanted to echo, Christine, when you were talking about making choices. I often feel that way when we do shows here. And want to let artists know that it's not necessarily about the quality of your work. It's more about what are the stories that you can tell with the pieces that you have. And if you have too many things that are similar or whatnot, but it's
Exactly.
much more about putting all the puzzle pieces together. It's not usually a commentary on the art itself.
And I'll throw something else on top of that. I find myself having to, when I have conversations with people, reminding them that museums are different than galleries. Galleries, you can put up the art, you're primarily trying to sell it. Museums tell stories, and that's very important to us. It's part of our philosophy of how we work. And
they each have their own mission, and that they also need to honor. So it's a much more complicated process,
Yeah. And I'd like to give up in wrapping up one more shout out to Exhibit Envoy, who we wouldn't have known about this unless they had all organized it. And we really love working with the Exhibit Envoy. So highly recommend Exhibit Envoy to other museums, especially the smaller museums. All right. Well, Christine Aaron, Mel Beach, Jami Tabak, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us tonight. And we'll look forward to catching up with you and your work down the road. Thanks so very much.
All right.
Thank
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Melissa, and thank you to our audience. Thanks for hanging out with us.